E aí, galera, tudo em paz com vocês? Sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Começamos agora mais um vídeo da série Judas Priest, discografia comentada. E hoje eu tenho um grande convidado aqui. Eu estou falando de Martin Popoff, biógrafo do Judas Priest, que veio participar da série do canal Metal Musikast para nós conversarmos um pouco sobre a discografia da banda. Martin Popoff, para quem não sabe, é um grande escritor, um autor de livros. Ele já escreveu Holy Smoke, Iron Maiden nos anos 90, Hit the Lights, o nascimento do thrash, Martin Popoff, Metal Heart, a história do Accept, Where He Goes There, Iron Maiden nos anos 80, e o livro que eu estou usando como base para fazer a série, um dos livros, né? Decade of Domination, biografia do Judas Priest, que vai do Rocka Rolla até o Defenders of the Faith. Tem também outro livro, Turbo Till Now, que vai do Turbo até o Firepower, mas esse eu não tenho. Então agora eu estou falando em português com vocês, eu vou falar essas mesmas palavras mais ou menos em inglês com ele, para ele entender o que nós conversamos aqui, e vai ser uma grande participação aí do Martin Popoff, que é um grande especialista de heavy metal em geral, e especialmente de Judas Priest, e também do Iron, do Metallica. Vocês viram aí os livros. Então eu vou começar a conversar com o Martin Popoff agora. Hi, Mr. Martin Popoff. Welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me, Cello. This is very cool. Nice chat with you. So, such a long distance. You've got summer, we've got winter up here in Toronto.
Yeah, it's very, very hot in São Paulo, Brazil right now. It's the beginning of the summer here. And I said in Portuguese that we will continue the special video series. It's entitled Judas Priest, Discography Commented. And it would be a total of 18 videos, one for each album. But now there will be 19 videos because this one, the exclusive interview with you, a special feature of Martin Popoff. Okay, be welcome.
Nice, excellent.
As I said, Martin Popoff is author of 115-ish books on hard rock, heavy metal, prog rock, punk rock, and record collection, plus work for Banger Films and writing for Goldmine and bravewords.com and the most important magazines of the world. Martin, specifically about Judas Priest, how many books have you written?
Well, first there was Heavy Metal Painkillers, which came out, I think it was 2007, and that was a full color throughout softcover book. But then that went out of print for a long time, and that's when I split it into, here's the two English versions of those two books, right? So it's greatly expanded and then turned into two books, Decade of Domination and then Turbo Till Now, which takes us up to Firepower. So I did those ones, and then there's a big coffee table book, a visual biography, which is a detailed timeline, then with lots and lots of pictures, and that's full color throughout. So in print right now, there's the three books, the two that basically tell the story in the normal way, and then the one that's detailed timeline with like 400 pictures, and it's all in color, memorabilia, live shots, picture, record sleeves, all that kind of thing.
Great, awesome. I have this one, the Portuguese version, Decade of Domination, is a great. Your work inspired my work at Metal Musikast. Your work, even in the books and in the Banger TV, I like it so much. And I invited you, Martin Popoff, to talk something about the Judas Priest catalog. So let's get into this. Martin, sometimes we forget how long Judas Priest has been around. They started in 1969, or we can consider 1972 as the year which there was a member of the current lineup, of course. What do you think is the main reason for the band to achieve this longevity?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. So to achieve longevity, I would say that they probably all had a pretty decent upbringing, family support, that kind of thing. I guess not everybody. KK didn't really have that much family support, but
Yeah.
it just seems like they weren't from one of the major music centers. They weren't from London or New York or Los Angeles. They're from Birmingham. So I think they're just genuinely good guys. There is even some intermarriage going on with uh, Ian's sister Sue and all that kind of stuff. So Ian's been in the band since kind of the beginning, right? Long time, longest standing member. So yeah, I guess they had good decisions along the way. They had some success along the way. There's a little bit of drugs and booze involved and whatever, and then obviously Glenn Tipton now has his medical issues, but yeah, not a lot of drama along the way, I suppose. I mean, they did lose Rob for a spell there, obviously with Ripper Owens coming in, but yeah, I just think that they never had anything major happen to them that caused them to fall out. They've still got more or less the core. You need Rob Halford in there, but obviously they've stayed together, but it's relative because obviously the lineup is much different now than it was in the early days as well.
I suppose that they got an ethic from the working class. Do you think is it possible?
Yes, I think so. I think that has a little bit to do with it as well. And, and even just the desire to get out of Birmingham and not end up in the factories, the same way Black Sabbath talks about that same issue. But yeah, and they stuck with it. They definitely persevered and really didn't make very much money at all or make a living at it really until pretty much British Steel. And that's quite a few albums in.
Yeah. And Martin, the first album, Rocka Rolla, is very different from the sound of the second album, Sad Wings of Destiny. What do you attribute such drastic change?
Boy, that's a tough one. I mean, I sometimes see sort of a similarity between the two. I sometimes look at Rocka Rolla as sounding like the demo version of Sad Wings of Destiny. But Sad Wings of Destiny absolutely is considered one of the landmark albums in all of heavy metal. I even consider it to be the first album that that shows a massive improvement all the way going back to 1970. So you've got Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Uriah Heep, very heavy, very humble, Deep Purple in rock. And then you've got some good heavy metal albums in between, but Sad Wings is a real step up in sophistication and intelligence of the riffs and the lyrics and timelessness. So you're right, there's quite a jump, but they did have some of that material early on. And, I think producers and label and whatnot even said, no, we don't want that song on here or that song, and they were held off to the next one. So it's almost like that material more or less is at the same time, but I guess the songs that ended up on the first one are slightly more commercial, and the songs that ended up on the second one are definitely more uncompromising. But not a lot of time has elapsed between them. It's 74 to 76. Granted, back then, it was often a record every single year. But yes, I agree with you. Massive improvement for Sad Wings.
Yeah. And in the 70s, they raised a middle finger to punk rock. Do you think it would have been good for Judas Priest sound to add some punk rock influences or not?
Well, that's an interesting question. What would have happened had they have done that? I'm glad they didn't, because Sin After Sin and Stained Class are considered super scientific and meticulously recorded, and the performances are just very spot on and on a dime. They're considered almost progressive heavy metal in a way. I mean, Rush kind of invented progressive heavy metal. You maybe put King Crimson a little bit in there as well, but Judas Priest is like the progressive heavy metal with lots of heavy metal in it, and it's a precursor to the new wave of British heavy metal and thrash, speed metal, all of that. So they're in there pioneering something pretty interesting. They might have had a little more success right away had they been a little more street ready, of the earth sort of thing. But yeah, I can't see it. I can't see any punk rock in what they do. But, I have to say that when it comes to Hellbent for Leather, the album after Stained Class, so we go 77, 78, and late 78 for that one. It does get a little more, it does get a little more, I think, a little more aggressive, and the riffs get a little more, straight between the eyes, en route to British Steel. So I wouldn't say what they're doing at this point is adding any punk rock, but I think what they are doing is they are adding a little accessibility and maybe even a slight Americanization to their sound, starting with Hellbent for Leather a little bit.
I got it, I got it. But Martin, in the 80s, they embraced the glam rock. Don't you think they should keep the middle finger up for that glam rock, especially they think it was fashionable in the USA, and keeping the sound based on the heavier sound?
Yeah, so my favorite album is Hellbent for Leather, and I think at that point it's the perfect balance between the complicated early stuff and then getting quite simple. Like even with British Steel, I thought that was a big step down in terms of dumbing down the sound. I often call that their Kiss album. Um, but on that, so I don't think either of the two super fast songs are all that great on that. But I think you see that the real big improvement in songwriting in Grinder and Metal God specifically. Those were the
Yeah.
two we really liked. And then as you move through time, they even got more melodic, and you could say even before hair metal happened, they got a little hair metal-y on Point of Entry, and then corrected a little bit and brought a little bit of that Hellbent for Leather back for Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith. But you're right, when you get to Turbo, that's when they really embraced the hair metal thing and wanted to sell some records, because they're looking around and seeing other bands are doing a lot more in terms of record sales than we are. What if we brought in a little bit of red leather with our black leather and teased our hair up a little bit and got some perms, you curled our hair, and wrote, these really simple songs like Parental Guidance. It's hot, wild, crazy nights, whatever it's called. I can never remember because it's such a stupid title. But at that point, that's almost like their second try at this, because Point of Entry was a little bit like that. It was Point of Entry is a little poppy, and this is now a little hair metal. So
Yeah.
you're right. I agree with you, Cello. Yeah, they should have kept the middle finger up against the hair metal thing. They tried it for one album, but then they went back again on Ram It Down.
Yes. I mean, neither Point of Entry nor Turbo reached sales they expect, but Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith did it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Screaming for Vengeance. British Steel sold well. Point of Entry, it went down. Screaming for Vengeance, it went up again. Defenders kind of went down a little, but still, those two together. Those two probably did well because they were accessible in a different way. They brought very, very sort of mechanized production values and drum sound. It doesn't sound very human, what Dave Holland is doing on those records. But they were heavier for sure. They were definitely heavier than Point of Entry, and I think they're even more interesting records than even British Steel. And you're right, Turbo didn't do that great, but it did still go platinum. So they're still, doing okay. They're a little frustrated that they're not a big multi-platinum band, and they aren't doing what, say, Ozzy Osbourne is doing, or they didn't do really particularly what Scorpions might have done at Love It for Sting. And then as you get into Turbo and beyond, they start seeing bands like Poison and Cinderella and Guns N' Roses selling way more records than they are. Even Whitesnake has a massive hit album in 1987, which is just the year after Turbo. So as they're doing Turbo and as they're touring Turbo, they're starting to see some even younger bands do better, and that's frustrating them also.
Yeah, I like both albums. I like Point of Entry and Turbo, of course, but it's undeniable they started acting and sounding like rock stars being overcome by Iron Maiden in the case of Point of Entry, and Metallica in the case of Turbo. What do you think? They are paying attention to Metallica at that time and Iron Maiden. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so in the first sort of run there, that's when the new wave of British heavy metal happens, and Iron Maiden emerges from that as the biggest band from that. So in the early days, Iron Maiden is almost like the punky version of Judas Priest. They're the young guys
Yeah.
coming up, doing essentially the same thing, but they are seeing, Judas Priest is looking over there at these young upstarts and seeing that there's a lot more just general excitement about Iron Maiden than there is about Judas Priest. So that happens. And then a few years later, Metallica comes out with first Kill 'Em All, gets a lot of people talking. Then Ride the Lightning is a masterpiece of metal. And I'm
Yeah.
sure the Judas Priest guys were smart enough in 1984 to look at that and compare with their own album and say, boy, just like Iron Maiden before, there's a lot of excitement about this new band. Yeah, there you go, making this really, really amazing record. And then Judas Priest does Turbo. And at that point, Metallica does Master of Puppets, which is considered an even bigger masterpiece. I did an album, I did a book called The Top 500 Heavy Metal Albums of All Time, way back in 2004, I think it was, 2005. And that was from a big poll, like we took a big survey, and Master of Puppets won the greatest heavy metal album of all time. So they're definitely now looking at that band and seeing how much excitement there is around Metallica and saying, well, I guess we're kind of has-beens at this point. We're floundering around with this sound and trying to be hair metal, and Metallica is being very cool in being even heavier and heavier and heavier, yet still writing good songs, but way heavier than Judas Priest ever was.
Okay. And talking about Iron Maiden, what impact did the success of Iron Maiden during the War of the Slavery tour? Uh, what impact did cause it caused on decisions taken by Judas Priest in the second half of the 80s? What do you think?
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if there's much to compare there. I mean, basically, that's when you started to see Iron Maiden at this point was kind of as big as Judas Priest was. They're playing as the concerts and the venues they played were essentially the same in North America at that point. I don't think there was much impact other than kind of jealousy and kind of maybe some quiet resentment that this was a band that used to support us. And Number of the Beast was hugely received. Peace of Mind, they're even bigger. Power Slave, they're even bigger. So they're having a great run of albums here. Really, by the time of Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Iron Maiden's already on a bit of a decline too. So Iron Maiden and Priest are both kind of having troubles around that time. And again, the excitement, the real raw excitement, whether it's in the sales or not particularly. Metallica didn't sell a lot of records, in 86, 87. But the excitement is around Metallica at that point. But yeah, I don't think much of this is affecting their decisions unless unless you consider this success of Metallica slightly influencing them to go back to really their heaviest album yet in Ram It Down.
And about Ram It Down, Martin, do you have any idea uh, why didn't they hire a real drummer to record this album? Why?
Yeah.
Why they used
Well,
an electronic drum?
yeah. So part of that is it's a big hassle and pain, and nobody wants to deal with firing your drummer. And you know, it's Dave Holland was a very simple meat and potatoes drummer. They probably didn't even realize yet that it might be a good idea to get a Scott Travis or a good thrashy technical drummer, and they probably didn't even realize it yet. And you also think, well, we can kind of make do and make this sound pretty good with electronic drums. Electronic drums were still looked at something pretty interesting and cutting edge and not something that's dated at all at this point. So, make it work. It sounds pretty good. We're fine. Most people don't really know that it's not real drums. So they get by. It works both ways. Dave Holland also wanted to quit as much as he was ever going to be fired. And, there was fighting going on. I remember one funny thing. I remember a quote that one time they came off stage, and Glenn Tipton was he was partying it up a little and maybe doing some cocaine and drinking and stuff or whatever. And they came off stage once, and Dave Holland turned to him and said something like, "Glenn, you played like you had one arm out there tonight." And that caused a big fight. Like, what a great insult, to give a guitarist, right? You played like you had one arm out there, lad, tonight. So it went both ways. But as we know, his days were numbered, and we got Scott Travis in.
Yeah, and I've heard some fans saying, and I don't know if is it true, that maybe Turbo and even Defenders of the Faith have electronic drums. Is it possible, Martin?
Yeah, I think so. You think back, sometimes it's a bit of a mix or a synthesis, and sometimes, it's a sampled sound, but you can hear definitely treatment on the drums, all through definitely Defenders and Turbo. You definitely hear a lot of stuff that doesn't sound very real.
Okay, and we talked about Metallica, and bands like Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer were rising as the next big thing in heavy metal at that time. Uh, the late 90s, the the late 80s. I mean, do you think they influenced the Judas Priest to write an album as heavy as Painkiller? Do you think you said about Metallica? Do you think that they were paying attention to the thrash metal from
Yes,
USA?
definitely. I think they
Yeah,
decided at that point, let's align ourselves with this heavier stuff rather than hair metal. And by that point, thrash is not selling that great. It's still just an exciting music. But still, the hair metal guys are just going up and up and up. So you would think, they'd look at that and say, "Wow, 5 times platinum, 7 times platinum, diamond." You think of Hysteria and Pyromania, right? Um, thrash was not multi platinum. I don't think anything would have been multi platinum by that point. But yes, and then they bring Pantera on tour as well, and that's later. But I mean that affects them as well. That affects Rob leaving the band to even
yeah.
move over to fight. So soon as they get that extra shot of inspiration from seeing how cool a band like Pantera is on Cowboys from Hell and Vulgar and stuff, that really throws a wrench into Judas Priest's future, because Rob is really starting to see that what we're doing is very dated, and I'm gonna go out and try something else. So he does War of Words and a Small Deadly Space with Fight, and gets this sort of street sound and street clothes on and all that kind of thing. And then Judas Priest at the same time, they make this super heavy album. But even when they come back with Ripper, they're sounding kind of Pantera-esque on Jugulator and Demolition. Those are those 3 albums together, and even including Ram It Down, you've got 4 albums that are quite heavy.
And about Brazilian band Sepultura, do you think that Sepultura did some impact caused some impact in the sound of Judas Priest in the Jugulator, maybe?
Definitely, because those were well-regarded records as well. Chaos AD and Arise, and then into Roots, and then Sepultura. Um, I don't know who or how many people or what goes on in terms of who moves to America, but they seem to be kind of semi-based in Phoenix, I guess, at the time. I don't know.
Yeah,
Does somebody
yeah,
move to
yeah.
Phoenix? Yeah.
They were
So
based in the Phoenix at the time, at
okay.
early
So
90s.
yeah. So obviously they still have a love for their homeland, and they're at home a lot. But they go up there. Rob Halford's there. So
Yeah.
there's definitely some influence there, and obviously there's a lot of excitement around Sepultura as well. And then Roots does well in the marketplace, and then Roots is actually one of the early albums to use Ross Robinson and help invent that whole new metal sound that's coming up as well. So definitely they had an influence.
I think that Max Cavalera lives in Phoenix nowadays. I think
Still, yeah.
Andreas is back to Brazil, and Paulo too. And talking about nowadays, Martin, what did you think about the Rock and Roll of Fame party? KK Down and Les Binks playing with the other guys.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, usually those things don't turn out that well with old members. Certain guys aren't inducted at the same time, or there's fighting and they don't show up. But that's pretty amazing that those guys were brought in. KK, less surprising because he's a huge part of the history. But to see Les Binks there is pretty cool too, because I mean, it's a it's the drum position. B, it's a drummer who was there for a brief time, and not even like the super famous albums. So it's pretty interesting that he's brought along as well. So that thing couldn't have turned out any better. I mean, obviously, practically speaking, Les Binks isn't going to be the drummer in the band, because Scott Travis does an amazing job, and he's been there longer than pretty much any member, right? And certainly any drummer by a long shot. But it could sow the seeds for KK coming back, because obviously there's there's some openness in the guitar position. Possibly everybody's crying for it, everybody wants it. How cool would that to have the two guitarists with the long blonde hair there, and maybe Andy Sneap bowing out and not being the guitarist, and just being the producer or something. So, or maybe have three guitarists, be like an Iron Maiden. So is this something good could come out of this, where KK is back in the band?
Great. And why don't they call KK back to the band, into the band? What do you think, Martin?
Well, I think it's just a lot of harsh words or bad things said on both ends, sort of thing, and you know, and almost like selling the case too well, that we don't want you in the band and I don't want to be in the band. So when you say that enough, the pile of bad words gets bigger and bigger, and I suppose that's it. But really, I can't see beyond that, and beyond the politics of Jane and Glenn and the management and that sort of thing. And they did fight a lot, I suppose, but it doesn't seem to be anything that can't be. It doesn't seem like anything insurmountable. It seems like something that they're all smart enough, and at this age, like, why not just mend fences and put them back in the band?
Yeah, I'd like to see KK back. Okay, I'd like to see. And Martin, considering their whole discography, do you think that from an artist point of view, Judas Priest is the most influential heavy metal band of all time?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think their influence is bigger than a lot of people think. You know, in terms of actually influencing certain styles, like when forget about just bigness and inspiration, like say Iron Maiden or Metallica or something like that. I think if you go back and think, like shift time back a little bit and think of influence in the way of like invention of certain things. I think you can almost make a case that Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple are all about the same. I don't think Iron Maiden invented anything particularly new, but they have a massive influence in terms of people love Maiden so much, and Maiden, like the Beatles or Kiss, caused a lot of people to want to pick up a guitar and start their own bands. Metallica, Metallica and all those thrash bands kind of did a lot together to contribute. Metallica is essentially such a huge band, and they're the biggest heavy metal band, but they literally got there by just being the best songwriters in the thrash field. But I think again, to go back, I think you take Black Sabbath, you take the various things Judas Priest did and the various things Deep Purple did, and I think it's those three that had the most in terms of building what heavy metal is.
Great, great. Martin, for over 50 years, Judas Priest have been around, releasing records and touring. What the future holds for Judas Priest?
Wow. Well, it's pretty neat that they got, the likes of Redeemer of Souls and Firepower. People love Firepower, so they've more or less done pretty good with getting a fair number of records out. So that's good. But we've had various health scares. Rob Halford's not going to be able to sing forever. He's still doing a pretty darn good job up there. Not the greatest of, if we were to list all of these guys, he'd be in the top 1/5 of guys doing a great job up there. So that's good. He's definitely not flaming out to the point where we can't have a Judas Priest, that's for sure. But so maybe they've got another tour or two in them. Maybe they've got another record in them. That would be good to see. But as we can see, you know, the lineup's getting pretty. It's a pretty compromised lineup. You know, there's always a few parts coming in and out, sort of thing. But yeah, I don't think this is a band where we have to say it's all over with. I don't see any reason why there can't be another record or two or tour or two.
Okay. Martin, let me show your books, the Portuguese versions, Hit the Lights, O Nascimento do Trash, em português, Judas Priest, Decade of Domination, Iron Maiden nos anos 80, Where He Goes There, Holy Smoke, Iron Maiden nos anos 90, and Metal Heart, a história do Accept. Martin, thank you so much for your time. Feel free to send a message to the Brazilian readers, Brazilian fans of Martin Popoff, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Brazilian fans. I mean, I have more books out in Brazil and in Portuguese than any other language. So thank you very much. Thank you, Denny at Denfire, for being so prolific with my books as well. But yeah, I'm just really pleased that I have so much out there. I mean, I had a trip planned actually down, you know, to visit Walsir and you know, do a book signing and stuff like that. But that got stopped by the pandemic. But I had my plane tickets booked and everything. I was on my way. That was August of 2020. But maybe someday I'll get down there as well. But thank you again, and thank you for being such great fans of heavy metal. So many bands go down there, and it turns out to be basically one of their greatest life memories when they go down and play Brazil, and they come back and they can't stop talking about how great it was getting down there and playing for the fans and how the fans sing along and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, it's an awesome music market, and hope to get there one day.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you again. Let me talk in português to the audience. Galera, beleza? Tudo em paz com vocês? Sejam muito bem-vindos. Muito obrigado pelo tempo que vocês ficaram aqui. Conversei com o Martin Popoff. Vou mostrar aqui para vocês o livro Decade of Domination, que eu tenho usado como base para a série Judas Priest, discografia comentada, e o Martin Popoff foi muito atencioso. Eu andei trocando ideia com ele, ele topou fazer essa entrevista. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Coloquem nos comentários, inscrevam-se. Thank you, Martin Popoff. See you in Brazil.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye now.
See you.